to resume our next panel discussion. So I'd like to introduce the moderator, Bashir Fancy, who's the chairman and CEO of the Canadian Information Processing Society, Ontario Board in Canada. And our panelists will be Paul Hanley, who's a cybersecurity partner at Deloitte Canada, and Geoff Stark, the Chief Information Security Officer for the Ontario Pension Board, Canada.
Good afternoon. I guess you know our names. I will maybe take a quick minute each to introduce themselves properly. My name is Bashir Fancy. I'm going to moderate today, so my role just changed a few minutes ago, but that's okay. We're good with that. We're talking about a very important subject here, but a very quick thing, my background in security, I come from a finance background, but more importantly, the part that really got me in many years ago at Visa I was Executive Vice President of Visa globally, internal audit, risk management, security. And in fact, I headed a standard or introduced a standard called PCI DSS. And I learned a few interesting things we'll share with you today about that. So let Paul introduce himself and then Jay.
Lovely. Thank you. Great to be here. So yeah, Paul Hanley, I'm a partner at Deloitte. I'm a cyber guy by background, so I've been in cybersecurity now for over 20 years, although it wasn't called cyber in the early days. And I'm really just here just to give my insight and views and so forth on cybersecurity and how, from a smart cities perspective, we can get on the front foot and make sure that we're secure. So that's me.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Geoff Stark. I'm CISO with Ontario Pension Board. Similar to Paul, I've been doing this cybersecurity thing for 25-ish years. The majority of my career has been in financials, typically banking. So this is my first government posting, let's call it. And similar, here just to give our insights and answer any questions you all might have about this world of security and the scariness that we live in every day.
So this is very interesting. So I've got a few questions. We'll get all the expert opinion shortly. But one of the things that both of them said is actually very interesting. In 1998, when the president of Visa Canada actually asked me to take over risk management and security, when my background was actually finance, I came originally out of PwC and then on to Air Canada and to Citibank, where I managed the operations. I told him, I'm not a security guy. I don't know this. And he said to me, you don't know how much of a security person you are or risk management because I'd done everything else. So the interesting part there was to understand the full picture, and hopefully we'll get down there. So one of the questions that I want to raise, and so I will try and keep time for you guys to ask questions as well, is that two things that stare big time at us in terms of whatever we introduced, whether it was compliance, PCI, whatever, and the fraud and the hacking we see every day, is that one of the things that plays into it every day is culture, or lack of security culture, I should say. And the fact that we don't build those processes in, we seem to react to everything that happens, right? If you look at it, there's only one type of company out there, or we think it's two, which is one that got hacked and knows the other one that got hacked and has no clue that it's happened to them. So we're going to let both this gentlemen speak to that. Paul can certainly start with the fact that what do you see from a cultural standpoint, and that's not helping or hurting?
Lovely, thank you. So I guess culture is an interesting one. When I grew up in the world of cybersecurity, first of all, people were mostly talking about technical things. So technical controls, implementing a bigger, better firewall, or some other sort of technical control to deal with cybersecurity. And so if you used to speak to the exec and the board and whoever else about cybersecurity, the view would be, well, we've got this latest tool and technology. Why do we need to do anything else to be able to deal with the threat? I think most organizations have realized that it is much wider than just a technological issue. You can have the best controls in place, but if you have people, for example, clicking on links that they shouldn't be, all of a sudden you've just bypassed some of the best security controls that you have and that you've been working really hard to implement, and all of a sudden the bad guys are in your systems and obviously can cause some damage. So typically, the advice that I give to people is always think about people, processes, and technology, and you need to think of them all in equal measure. The other thing also is to think about prevention, detection, and reaction to security incidents. So I admit when I first got involved in cybersecurity, I was always looking for the, I guess, the gold-plated solution. Always try and prevent security incidents. If you have enough controls in place, just prevent everything and then you'll be okay. That's never going to be the case. And I think most people realize that. And now it is about thinking about not just preventing it, yes, try and do that, but also try and detect a security incident as quickly as you can. Most organizations, in terms of when they have a breach, it normally takes around 210, 220 days to actually detect when you've actually been breached. The worst that I know of, which is actually here in Canada, is 9.5 years. So an organization was literally being breached for 9.5 years before they actually found out about it. So that's how long it can take to detect it, but try and detect it as quickly as you can. And then the final one for me is react. So once you have detected some sort of issue, some sort of incident, bad guys in your systems, whatever it is, make sure that you react in the right way. And what I mean by that is make sure you take it seriously, take all the right opportunity to investigate it properly, maybe alert the authorities if appropriate. If users have been affected, make sure that you tell them, et cetera, et cetera. And again, going back to the worst that I've ever heard, it's 4.5 years in terms of an organization actually admitting it's had a breach. 4.5 years is probably a little bit too long, I would suggest.
Yeah, great points. So the other part that I'm excited that we're here today. I've been noting over the last year or so, I've been invited to more non-IT conferences, which I'm taking as a good sign. The reason I say that is because, so today we've heard a lot about innovation and new technologies and IoT and big data and putting all these things together, but as the security guy sitting out in the audience, I didn't hear much talk about security. One of the things that we're advocating for as security professionals is getting to the point now where the security is an add-on at the end, right? You don't deploy something and then go, oh, we forgot security. Let's go call those guys and see if what we've put out there is safe or not. But instead, changing that culture, that mindset to say, let's include the security guys from the beginning, right? And I think some of it is our own problem. As security people, we're seen as the, wait, you can't do that, stop. Why would you ever want to do that? So within the security community too, I've been really advocating for, we can't be seen as being disablers, right? The security team should be here and working side by side with the business to enable the business, or in this case, cities or governments, to enable them to do what they want to do, but do it in the least risky way, right? Understand that there are going to be risks, and what can we do to mitigate them and lower them, if not outright get rid of the risk completely. But this traditional way of doing security doesn't work, as we've seen time and time again, breach after breach, news after news report, right? So something needs to change, and I think that's getting so that security and IT and the business are all kind of at the table together at the same time, start to finish, and then in the ongoing operation.
Yeah, this is actually very interesting points that both the gentlemen have actually brought up, and I'll tell you why. We heard a comment today, it doesn't matter where it came from, but about insurance. And I had been asked a question by 2 or 3 CEOs of companies when it came to PCI that saying, if I don't comply, what will be the penalty? What is going to be the penalty? It's actually ridiculous to start from that standpoint, because this is supposed to be your last line of defense if you've done all the right things. So, for example, if you had a problem with PCI, just because you got a piece of paper saying you're compliant means nothing. if you were not compliant on that day when the compromise happened, you're going to be responsible for everything. It's a hell of a lot of cost, right? So the question becomes, why are we thinking like that? That means we don't understand, which comes back to the question about, is there plain language speak in your organization? Does the CEO, what he says and what he means could be two different things. You go in the middle and what they understand is something different, and you go lower down and they think something else. So are the organizations talking the same language all the way through?
Thank you. So I would say that there's been a bit more of a shift, which is good. So I think people are beginning to realize that they can't do what I would call the old school way of cybersecurity, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I've seen people in the past get away with just talking about encryption algorithms and people's eyes glazing over and just, oh, okay, I'll sign the budget if this is really that important. And for me, that's the wrong way of doing things. It's kind of the old school way of doing things. I think you need to talk in the language of the business. You need to make sure that they genuinely understand what the risks are and also the impact to them. And I think this is something that has also shifted over the years. So often it used to just be a security person dealing with security for sort of half a day a month or something like that, just in the background while they're doing everything else and running the systems and the networks. That, in my view, in most instances has now changed, and we have proper dedicated security functions. They get it, they understand it. They can't always communicate it in the right way, but I think they're getting better. What we've also found is that boards are realizing that it's them that can lose their jobs, or even in certain countries and certain instances, even go to prison. So it's really beginning to focus the attention of the senior executives in terms of making sure that they've got cybersecurity right. I would probably say, when I started out in security in the 90s, very few of the people that I would be speaking to would be the board members and the really senior executives. Whereas now, I'd probably say maybe 90% of the conversations that I have are with either board members or with full boards to actually talk about cyber risk and also what they should be doing as senior individuals as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've noticed, again, over the last couple of years, I have a standing seat at our board meetings now to give quarterly updates on cybersecurity. A lot of it, I think, is due to the fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the news, right? I know when the first time I stepped in front of this board, the first question they said was, can you keep us out of the Toronto Star, right? So part and parcel to that, though, is then doing board education and awareness. So the board does understand what is their responsibility in this new world, right? Before, again, I'll go back like you to, earlier days, the board didn't care about security. The conversation was we were a cost center, right? So again, from the perspective of how do we sell our solutions, it's learning, which was difficult for me, I'll admit, learning what does the business do to make money, and how can I then go in and speak to the business in a language that they understand, because they don't want to hear about encryption and endpoint and protection and antivirus and IPS and blah, 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 right? But I can come in, though, and say, if I deploy the security solution, right now it costs us $400 an hour to clean up a virus outbreak per workstation, right? And if I come from a large bank with 45,000 endpoints, that's a large sum of money. If I can say I can reduce that to either $0 or $100, that's a massive reduction in cost. The business understands the cost savings. So I might go and request, a budget for a particular project, but I need to then demonstrate that it's not just about keeping the organization safe, but here's the return on the investment that I can bring back to the business.
That's actually a very good point. One of the things that I think Jay or Paul touched on is the understanding of, when you look at the whole cybersecurity or security, it's actually a journey. There's no end point, because everything we do, the bad guys will do one better. Because remember, they came from our ranks at some point in time. They understand our setup very, very well. So the question then becomes, you got technology is advancing at an unbelievable pace. In fact, that's why we are here talking about smart cities and where we're going. So the question becomes, that has also formed skill gaps, plenty of them, because of the fact that organizations may not be spending that much money on retraining. We're doing some stuff on artificial intelligence. So where do you see this problem in terms of bridging the skills gaps? Because really, security, the way I see it, is really enterprise-wide responsibility, not just one person, right? So,
Thank you. So that's a good question. So security skills are a challenge, and what I mean by that is everybody wants to have good cybersecurity people working for them. And there's not enough good cybersecurity people out there. So that's caused a number of things to happen. People that maybe aren't very good at cybersecurity have inflated salaries and all of this sort of stuff. And so it has caused a bit of a challenge there. There are, I think, a number of things that are positive. So there's more and more programs, whether it's at college or university or whatever, that actually are teaching people the basics and the skills and capabilities to be able to have a good career within cybersecurity, which I think is very positive. But I also think, from my perspective, when I look at skills and capabilities and resources, I also look at people that don't necessarily have a cyber background or even necessarily an IT background. So if you look at where the bad guys have gone and what the bad guys are now doing, they're using, for example, more psychological skills. I actually do a presentation tomorrow here, and I'm kind of talking about some of the latest attacks and whatever else. But you can see that the bad guys are really trying to twist the knife in to make something happen, whether it's to make you pay a ransomware demand or make you do something that you wouldn't normally do. And they are genuinely using psychological skills on people to make this happen. So as part of what I'm looking for in my teams, it's people with psychological skills. I'm also looking for people that understand legal and compliance, because again, legal and compliance is becoming much more attuned to cybersecurity. So I look for those sorts of skills. I also look for people that can communicate well. And again, it links into one of your previous questions about speaking to, whether it's the board or the exec or whoever else, you need to be able to speak their language. So a number of really good cybersecurity people, I would say their backgrounds are from other areas other than IT and security. And so they started out as English majors or whatever else, biologists or something else like that. And then they grew into cybersecurity. And so they have the communication skills, but they're able to then build on top of that the cyber skills. So it's kind of doing the same thing, but from a different direction. And some of them are incredibly strong, talented individuals. So I would just say in terms of talent, I look for all different types of people.
Yeah, one of the things, you know, I'm a small government organization. I can't afford to hire people right now. Even coming from, so I was with CIBC previously, even a large, one of the big 5 banks in Canada, holding on and retaining our good people was difficult, unfortunately. Other companies came along and scooped up our analysts. Had to get one dig in.
Thank you.
But it's a reality where if even a large national bank or global bank can't retain the staff, what are we to do? So I started looking at the problem a little bit differently, and I approached something that I did at a different bank a number of years ago. Was I went in front of my board and my senior executive team and said, why are we running data centers in our locations? We're not a data center company, we're a bank. So let's outsource that to a true data center company. And now I'm doing the same thing with cybersecurity. We're not a cybersecurity organization, we're a pension fund. Why are we going to build out a security operations center, bring on all these security analysts when that isn't a core competency? It doesn't make the pension fund grow, it doesn't help our members other than keeping their data secure, but it doesn't have a return on the bottom line. So let's outsource that to a third party, that they're the experts. And then, coincidentally enough, I don't have to worry about the skills shortage because now it's on that third party. So again, looking at the problem a little bit differently than traditionally, which was admittedly difficult for me to give up because the security guy in me wants to take everything and wrap it, and this is mine and you can't touch it, to I'm going to now put this out. But now I have a different problem in my skills is I need to have people that are good at governance, who can work that relationship, who can audit that third party to make sure that they are doing their job the way that we've contracted them to do.
Actually, excellent. So that we don't hog all the questions, do you guys have any questions that this gentleman can answer? Yes, sir.
Just on that last point around the outsourcing of the security, where does the sort of risk and reward and liability sit around such an important relationship?
So I brought it up, so I'll answer. Oh, am I off again? Okay, I'm back. That could take a long time to answer everything to probably to your satisfaction, but the risk is that I can't do it myself. I can't hire to do it myself, and the sheer amount of data that is being generated by the security tool sets, humans can't keep up with it anymore either, right? So the risk is I can't do my job as well as I know I should be able to do with the limited staff that I have today. That means that the organization is potentially at risk of being breached because we don't have eyes watching 24/7. Bringing in a third party who are trained security experts, and that's all they do is cybersecurity. Now I've given that over to them, and yes, I've also given a bit of risk there, but that risk to me now is lower than me not being able to meet my my obligations, right? Now that third party, if they're good, you got to make sure you do your background and pick a good partner. It's on them to make sure that they're doing their job right. You got to make sure your contracts with them are good. You have proper SLAs that they're going to meet when there's an incident, and build incident response into that as well. So now all of a sudden I go from having a team of me to a global team of security experts that are monitoring 24/7, that are coming to me with recommendations on what we should be doing, right? And now I'm growing basically my team to a global presence that I don't have today, and I'll never have with an organization my size. They can take data from all of their customers and detect attacks in near real time that I don't have that capability today. So I'm buying things that I can't bring on myself. There is risk, right? One of the big issues that we had originally when I first brought this to our board was data residency. And this whole, all of our data has to remain within Canada. What do you mean you want to partner with a global organization where the data could be following the sun as their data centers come online around the world? So there was a lot of talk about how do we secure the data that this third party is going to be able to access. But again, if you go into it knowing what you need to do, you can write the contracts in such a way that protect you from those eventualities. It's a bigger question, but
yeah, absolutely. Paul, you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. So completely agree with everything that's been said so far, and I do think sometimes people underestimate the whole contractual phase. It's not just a case of just kind of almost signing on the dotted line and walking away. There's a bunch of different things that you need to be thinking about. I mean, it's things like metrics and KPIs and all of that sort of stuff, and depending on your organization, and also depending on what you're looking at outsourcing, it can get very, very complicated. And so you may, for example, mandate that detection of specific events is within a certain number of minutes, and then the response to the events are within, again, a number of minutes, maybe within half an hour, again, depending on the organization and depending on your requirements. But it's all about trying to define as much as you can. The other thing that you also need to be thinking about is the future. And what I mean by that is the bad guys have got very, very innovative in terms of what they're doing and how they're operating. So if you're now outsourcing, will the outsourcing organization be able to take that into account? Or do you have to suddenly do some big change request or look at another organization? So my view is always try and think ahead, not just in terms of what you currently need, but where the market's going, where the industry is going, where the hackers are going. And also think about new innovation and new capabilities. And obviously, given where we are today in smart cities, things are moving very, very quickly there. And so you always need to be thinking about the very latest threats and risks of today, but also those of tomorrow. And so if you are outsourcing, think about how you can somehow include that within the contract.
Excellent. Just 2-3 points I can add to that in terms of one of the things we had thought through when we were putting the PCI standard out there was you outsource the work, but you don't outsource the responsibility. It remains yours, which is why what Paul just said and Jay's talked about is critical, that you must have the ability to manage that agreement and contractual and all the stuff that you just heard. Second thing is that be careful, because many years ago when you outsourced because it was cheaper. Remember, you don't outsource because somebody was very good at security. So when you went to India or wherever you went to process, it was because of the price. Now that mindset has to change to see that you won't get it cheaper, because you really want good, you will have to pay for it, right? So cheap is not always good. It could be, but, and then you have to manage that part. So I think that's going to be the key, and then make sure that you are actually managing that kind of agreement. So any other question? Hopefully that answered your question, right? Perfect. Any other question? Somebody go, okay. You're getting the mic.
Good afternoon, panelists. Thanks for being here. I have a data analytics background, and I'm at this expo to learn more about how smart cities will be utilizing the data for the benefit of the residents. From a smart city standpoint and a security standpoint, what would be top of mind for you in terms of a massive breach on the residents' data? That hasn't come up today in today's conversations, and I'm wondering like what your insights might be relating to that. So we've seen in the news a lot of breaches on customers at a company level, but at a city level, what might actually come up and how impactful would that be?
And your question is, has it happened? Well, the answer probably is that it has already happened. The question is that, have you heard about it and how they've dealt with it, is what you're asking
Well,
about.
has it happened at the city level? I don't know. It's a question to you guys.
The city of Atlanta was just shut down pretty much.
Yes, it has happened at the city level, absolutely.
Right? Was it Atlanta?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the city of Atlanta was breached a month or so ago, and all of their services, essential services, were down for almost a month, I think. Right? That's kind of a destructive attack. I think where you're asking is what happens if our personal information of all Ontarians got out, right? So, you know, you're talking now the scale of like an Equifax breach, where your day-to-day impact may not be that big, but your long-term impact with ongoing fraud, identity theft, now that's going to become a bigger impact, right? How do you go back and replace social insurance numbers for people? What happens now if we start doing fingerprint or retinal or any other type of bio-authentication and that data gets lost? I can't go out and get new fingers, right? Well, not yet. So we're moving into this space now where your digital identity is becoming very important, and depending on what we use to enable that authentication, that's going to be a critical question that needs to be answered. Because today, you know, it's a username and password, or it's your social insurance number and password, which is worse. But we need to have a way that if something happens with our digital identity, that we can dump that identity and recreate a new one that's separate and has a different form of authentication that still knows it's me. So I don't think we're there yet. There's a lot going on in that space. But you know, what you're talking about is one of the worst case scenarios. If I just look at my own organization, our pension data, and it's strange because not that I didn't care about data when I was at the banks, but I was more about protecting the money. Now where I am is most of the money in our pension fund is tied up in investments. So if someone got into our bank, to our organization through a breach, them actually extracting money out would be difficult. But what is very scary to me is we have Ontario Provincial Police in our database. Now there's lives at danger, right? If the information gets out of an undercover police officer, like that person could be killed. So that really changes, again, the mindset of how am I going to protect this data that I've been entrusted with. Now, if you take that out and put it to a province-wide and all that information got out and you have judges, lawyers, police, right? That's like digital Armageddon almost.
You know what, I'll turn the question around slightly for these two gentlemen. In that, what you're asking about the breach, one of the interesting things is we're talking about smart cities of the future, right? Which is a good thing. We all want it. And I work very closely with the city of Mississauga. I don't know if Sean's here. But it's fantastic to see that. Question is security fundamentally in part of their planning for either them or anybody else? And the answer has to be no, it's not. Because we are trying to make things easier and better and faster and all that is fantastic. We react, right, afterwards to those things when in fact they should be right at the seat at the table to say, okay, we're going to do this thing, we're going to collect more data, we'll make it easier, we'll make it accessible. Health is another one when you look at, the question is, are we doing that? And I think the answer is no, we're not doing to the extent we should be doing. And what should be done?
Well, so I just want to ask a question back to you then as a data scientist. Is security included in your day-to-day work? Okay. Well, at least you're thinking about it, so that's good.
That's a good thing.
Yes.
I'll just give maybe a few thoughts as well. And again, it's a good question. Again, I'd almost turn it around and say, well, what's the risks? What's the risk in the smart city? And depending on who you are, the risk may be very different, and what you would do to address it would be very different. So there's maybe a couple of things I'll talk about there, but if you go back to basics, whenever you have something new, whether it's new technology or something, you can always use it for good or evil. So take fire. Fire is great. You can use it to keep warm and survive and all that sort of stuff, but you could also use it for evil. You can burn people and all that sort of stuff. Equally the same with a knife. Again, you can use a knife to do some really good stuff. You could use a knife as a weapon as well. The same is true for any type of technology. And that's what hackers and bad people have realized. And so whatever the new technology is, they're always thinking about how they can use this great new thing that makes our lives easier in terms of making it faster, more efficient, making it more comfortable for us. They always try and think, yes, but how can I screw it up? How can I make it bad for the people to really be able to twist that knife in and use it for bad? And so if you look at a smart city, and again, it depends on the smart city and it depends on how far you go, but there's lots of things. I always start with the worst risk. The worst risk is loss of life. So could somebody affect a smart city to cause loss of life? And I would say, coming back to the point that's already been made, if you haven't thought about security properly from the start, then yes, you can. So you need to be thinking about being secure by design. And it's not over there. You then need to constantly keep up to date with the latest risks. You need to be testing. Well, what about if we did this? Or what about if we made that change? And humans make mistakes. So again, even if you think you're secure, somebody might have come in, changed the configuration slightly, and all of a sudden you're insecure. So you need to be continually thinking about security. If you then ratchet things down slightly in terms of, well, loss of life, yes, that's bad. You can't go one level down. What about privacy? And again, you think of a smart city, you've got privacy in terms of data, which we've talked about, which is great. And yes, it can be very bad depending on the type of data. What about privacy of people? So again, if I'm able to hack into all the cameras in a smart city, and what about if I could hack into your phones and your laptops that are already in your house using this infrastructure? Well, you know what? That's already been done, and you can do that. And there's a bunch of different things which I can bore you with to tell you how to do that. So again, it depends on who you are and depends on the risk that's associated with it. But for me, it's about thinking about all of this stuff in advance and not waiting until somebody's hacked in, you find out there's an issue, and then you try and deal with it.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think there's another question over here.
There's
Do you
another
still have a question?
Yeah.
So it may be probably more than a question. It may be, let's say, if you accept that for convenience purpose, people accept to, let's say, I want to use another website, oh, that's great if I can use Google authentication to log in this new website. I don't have to keep remembering number of accounts and so on. If there is no regulation in the industry and people are able to authenticate with one account into multiple systems, the moment one of the systems is weak, we have a cascade effect on everybody. Even the ones that were safe and the ones that are unsafe or the ones that they don't know about it. And then there is no validation. All the PCI regulations and the contracts that get written, I can tell you from hands-on experience, a developer that practically implements the database structuring and he writes the code has no understanding of what the CEO is about to sign. The CEO is signing papers and signing his responsibility, and he is liable for what his employees are supposed to do. The developer is going to do his best to implement what he is supposed to when it's in regards to credit card authentication and so on. But is the PCI regulation going to be imposed by somebody? Is it somebody coming and verifying the work of the developer that is done right? And that when the CEO signed that paper, was the information passed from the CEO to the developer and back and verified by somebody? So then our private information stored into that system is secure.
So that's an excellent question. I'll tell you, if I could wind the clock back, there are a few things I would have done different. Because what has happened is we're in culture of ticking boxes, okay? What you're just talking about is the culture of ticking boxes to say, is that don't allow access to the data, and we said put a lock. The reason we had put certain language in there, which was prescriptive, for the purposes, because how else do you write? You write, you gotta remember, we started writing the standard in 1998 when I had my butt kicked because of the fraud problems, and it was to do with Canada and UK. So I was before their office, I was called to UK saying, if you don't do this, we'll shut the cards down and all that and the other, right? That what started 2000, 2001. We are talking 17 years later about this issue now because people haven't adopted it properly. But there is a second key important thing that you brought up, is when you're doing something about Sarbanes-Oxley or PCI, whatever, remember one thing, you were forced to do it rather than you believing that you should be doing that. There's a very big difference when you actually believe in something, you will do it. If you are forced to because of compliance, which means Visa says, if you don't do this, we charge you a penalty. You're going kicking and screaming into something, you're not gonna do it well. It's like me doing a job that I'm not good at, but I'm forced to do. If I understand, I like that. So now the problem for us and for everybody else is, do they really understand the background to and the value of why we were doing this? And I would have to believe, no. And that's the problem. Sarbanes-Oxley, after subprime mortgage problems, how many people are in jail? Please point out to me. What happened? There were all sorts of acts we have out there because politicians do stuff for the purpose of politicians, right? To win votes, to do the things so they look like they're doing something. We have to do the common sense thing. Obviously, self-regulation doesn't work as well as it should. But I think you're bringing up a very good point. There is a tremendous benefit, right, to doing this thing properly. How about if I told you that PCI compliance, 27001 patent tax, you look at some of the SAS 70s, all those things has 70% common criteria, because we didn't pull it out of thin air. We took it from COSO, COBIT, ITEL. That's what the standard was built on. Yet we do them separately. People are in charge of that separately. So we introduce risks when we operate like that. That needs to change. And that's the reason I said about skills earlier, is that one of the problems we're seeing is that technology is moving fast, but we haven't changed the structure at the top. It's still the same in most part, right? So that needs to change. In fact, I can add one other thing, that 70% of the jobs that people are coming out of universities that will go to don't exist yet. Think about it. So how are we prepared for those things? And so when you hear that about 45% jobs are going to be gone, I'm going to say it's a hell of a lot more than that are going to be gone, because AI. So are we spending money on retraining? What you're talking about is education. That's where we are not doing a good job, right? We need to improve, or maybe we're doing some parts. I will let the two gentlemen add to that.
So number one, compliance doesn't equal security, right? So you can be PCI compliant. Heartland, Target, Home Depot, who else?
All compliant.
All PCI, Equifax, all PCI compliant, and they all got breached, right? So because they don't have a culture of security in those organizations. Yep. Yeah, and it won't be done until there's actual penalties to the people, as you said, right? So Equifax, the CIO of Equifax that got fired got a $20 million severance package. Only 20 million. I mean, the poor guy, right? He lost his job. So, but why isn't that guy facing potential prison terms for exposing the data of 330 million Americans and 100,000 Canadians? They would have had third-party auditors. You can't just go check and say that you're secure, right? You need to also bring in experts that would look and say, okay, we've met the compliance aspect of Sarbanes-Oxley or PCI, but that's just like, to me, that's like, you know, your table stakes. There's way above and beyond that organizations need to go to actually be secure, and they're not going there.
And I completely agree with all of that. And I think the other challenge that you have is the world is moving incredibly quickly. There's new attacks that are coming out all the time. And again, you're only as good as your weakest link. And people also do make mistakes. Now, again, each organization is different. And those, even if they've had PCI certification, there's multiple reasons why they've still had a breach. It might have been something outside of scope. It might have been some brand new attack. It might have been a mistake that somebody made. It could have been a misconfiguration. It could have been multiple different things. To really have proper security, get rid of all people, and then you'll be fine. No.
Yeah, sorry, it's just one, and it's a point-in-time assessment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's the other one. So
Absolutely.
It's done, and then new things happen. Sorry.
No, and that's exactly it. And you've got all of these different moving components. And if you're a smaller organization, I would argue it's probably a little bit easier to keep things tight and try and keep on top of it, assuming you've got the right resources to be able to do so. When you're a large multinational, potentially a global organization, then it's a real challenge. And that's why I go back to the point that I mentioned earlier, which is, yes, still always try and prevent security incidents, comply with good security practice, whether it's PCI DSS or other things, always do your best. But you know something may well go wrong. And it could even be an employee, an internal employee goes rogue and does something they shouldn't have been doing. It could be a third-party supplier, could be anything. There's so many different ways that things can go wrong. And so what I would always suggest is you need to try and take all of these things in context, do your reviews up front, design correctly, build in security so it's a sort of layered approach. Think about detecting really, really quickly. Make sure you react in the right way. And that's probably about as good as you can do. And it's not a perfect answer, but I would say if there was a silver bullet in cybersecurity, then people would be implementing it right now.
So as we end, I'll leave you with this thought. If you're not familiar with GDPR, which is the global data protection that kicks in 25th of May in Europe, if you do business with them, you are supposed to comply. A component of that is privacy by design that was done by Dr. N. Kevorkian, and Deloitte is involved in that. So you might want to look at both these documents, privacy by design and the GDPR, because you'll get a pretty good sense of what needs to get done. And on that note, Paul, thank you very much, and Jay, for sharing your thoughts, and thank you very much for asking the questions.